Daily Rambam for Friday out of Shabbos Kodesh Daled Kislev Tafshin Pei Aleph, the 26th Perek Shisha v'Esrim of Hilchos Shabbos. In the previous Perek, we learned about the fundamentals of the laws of Muktzah, Klisha Malach de Leheter, Klisha Malach de Leisser, Muktzah Machmas Chisar and Kis, Muktzah Machmas Isser, etc. And now in this Perek, the Rambam is going to continue with this subject. Here the Rambam is going to be addressing halacha by halacha, particular objects, particular situations, as we shall see. Halacha Aleph, Kol Klei Ha'orig v'chavalim v'konim shaloi. So all the utensils used for weaving, which includes chavalim, the cords, and the konim are the reeds. So mutla taltlon kekli shemalach de le'isser. So obviously orig itself, ariga is one of the malachas on Shabbos. So tools that help you do that are kli shemalach de le'isser. But as we know, you can carry a kli shemalach de le'isser in certain cases if you need it for some reason. The exception is the upper beam and the lower beam. These typically are not moved around. They're sort of inserted and set in place. So for that reason, it's not something you could carry at all. And the pillars of the entire device, you're not allowed to carry because they are sort of very strongly inserted in the ground. And if you take it out, you're creating a hole, and then we're concerned that you might want to smooth the hole out. So that's sort of a different reason for that. Ushar klei ha'oreg mutarin, and everything else, any other equipment that we didn't mention until now that relates to weaving, is entirely mutter. Although it's the pashtos, we mean mutter l'talton kekli shemalach de le'isser, like we said in the beginning, it's all for the purpose of weaving, though. The Maggid Mishnah says that all the other kelim are kelim shemalach de le'isser, and the koivdin, the problem with the beams was that it doesn't have a teiras keli. However, you look in Rashi, in the Gemara, in the relevant Gemara, Rashi says that the other kelim you're allowed to carry because you can use them for another chazul tashmish acher. So it sounds like Rashi is saying that it's not even a keli shemalach de le'isser. It sounds like Rashi is saying it, since you could use it for other things, so it's mamash mutter. But the Maggid Mishnah says, I agree with the Rambam. It seems pretty clear from Gemara that if it's miyuchad le'isser, if it's intended mainly for the purpose of isser, for weaving in this case, even if you're not makbid and you could use it for other things, we still peg it as a keli shemalach de le'isser. And then you can carry it following the rules that apply to keli shemalach de le'isser. Halacha beis. Brooms made of date branches, etc., which are used to sweep. Essentially, the Rambam just means brooms. A broom is actually a keli shemalach de le'heter. The act of sweeping is permitted. So the broom, which is created for the act of sweeping, is therefore a keli shemalach de le'heter. The Maggid Mishnah points out that it's not so simple, because is sweeping allowed on Shabbos?
Smoothing.
So if you look in the Gemara, it actually says about the machbedeh shel tamara kli shemalach de le'isser. But in the Rif writes that ha'idna, since we hold like Reb Shimon, who says davar she'eino miskaven is mutter, so sweeping the house, a normal house, so whatever happens is davar she'eino miskaven. So that means the whole halacha changed, and now the broom became a keli shemalach de le'heter. And even though the Maggid Mishnah says, the Rambam himself in Perek Chafalef said you're not allowed to sweep unless it's stones, but ultimately, since there's a case with stones which you're allowed to sweep, so it remains a kli shemalach de le'heter. If you look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Ches and Sif Pei Zayin, Alter Rebbe says the brooms are kli shemalach de le'heter according to those who say it's permitted to sweep on a tiled floor, and even though during the week you use it for other floors, but at the very most, it's a kli shemalach de le'isser u'leheter. That Alter Rebbe addresses the concept of something which is equally used for isser and heter. And the halacha in that case is that we treat it like a kli shemalach de le'heter, like we explained earlier in Sif Chafalef. The Alter Rebbe said directly, if it's a kli that's used for isser and for heter, we treat it like a kli shemalach de le'heter, because as long as it's miyuchad for that. However, if you say that it's also to sweep even on a tiled floor, so then brooms would be a kli shemalach de le'isser, because there is no heter. All right. Weiter in the halacha.
How can you call it a kli shemalach de le'isser if it's being used for a stone floor?
Alter Rebbe said there's two opinions. One opinion says you're not allowed to sweep at all. If you follow the opinion that you're not allowed to sweep at all, then
so that's what's sad if it's an earthen floor.
No, those who say you can't sweep anywhere.
Even on a stone floor.
There is such an opinion. So if that's your opinion, like the Gemara simply said, Kli Shemalach L'Iser. If you hold that there's a scenario in which you're allowed to sweep, then it's a Kli Shemalach L'Iser. If you hold that there's no scenario, then it's a Kli Shemalach L'Iser. That's how it's going to work. Continuing the halach levenim shenishrim and opinion, bricks left over from a building project. And kachli shemalach leheter. We treat the bricks like a kli that is used for heter. Penishrim lo hasav alein. It's something you would lean on. Sharei shofin nice and a matakar nice, and you can file them down and fix them up nicely, and then you can use them for heter. But if you piled them up, it looks like he wants to use them for another building project. Harei hiktzan, so then he set them aside for that, and then be'asel etaltlan, then you ought to carry them at all. Halacha gimel, cheres ktana, a small piece of earthenware. Mutla taltla afil b'rishus harabim. You're allowed to carry it even in the rishus harabim. When we say even in the rishus harabim, we don't mean anything to do with the laws of carrying in the rishus harabim. It's still dalat amis, etc. But we mean is that if you find it in the rishus harabim and you have no use for it, if you found it in the rishus harabim, there's nothing in the rishus harabim that you could use this cheres for. You're still allowed to pick it up and move it within the 4 amis. Because if you were elsewhere in a chatzar, you had a small keli, you would be able to use the cheres to put on top of it. So even though you're in the Rishus Harabim now, where you don't have a kli katan, but you're still allowed to move it around, again, within the rules of tiltal on Shabbos. And Magen Mishnah points out, Mepharshim say, this is dafka referring to cheres, because it's part of a broken keli, but a stone, we said stones are mukta. Continuing on, you have the stopper of a barrel that's cut off. We had this earlier as well. The magufa, it and the broken pieces you're allowed to carry it. But if you threw it in the garbage while it was still out of Shabbos, then you're not allowed to carry it. So the Magen Mishnah says clear that it's only if you threw it because then you establish for the purpose of this Shabbos that you don't want it, doesn't serve any use for you. But if you threw it in the garbage on Shabbos, since it was still a kli during Bein HaShemashos, it stays a kli throughout Shabbos. So throwing something in the garbage doesn't automatically turn it into something that's not a kli, something that's not useful if you threw it out on Shabbos. If you throw it before Shabbos, then it's a problem. And that's how the Alter Rebbe says it as well in Shulchan Aruch and in Sifchav Tes. Alter Rebbe says that even if it's in the Rishus Harabim, where you can't use it for anything directly, but of course in the Chatzar it's useful. And the same goes for other broken kalim. And then Alter Rebbe gets into the garbage, and Allah Halamed, Alter Rebbe gets into the subject of the piece was thrown in the garbage. So first, if it wasn't by Yom, you're not allowed to carry it on Shabbos. You were maktzeh, you're not going to. You determined, you established, you're not going to use it to cover anything. So it's not a keli anymore. And even if it's still, let's say a rich person, Alter Rebbe adds in different halachas the element of a rich person versus a poor person. A rich person doesn't need this little thing to cover his kalim. He threw it in the garbage. What about a poor guy? A poor guy would gladly, he would never throw such a thing out. But we follow the bailam, Alter Rebbe says. We follow the owner of this house. If this owner threw it in the garbage, if it's useless to him, then an ani can't come and take it on Shabbos. Cannot. Because the owner determines whether this is useful to him or not.
If it's not useful to him, then maybe it's not melach l'isra.
It's not a keli at all.
Not a keli at all. So why
shouldn't
it be?
So it's usher. We're saying if you threw it in the garbage, if an usher threw it in the garbage, even though it's useful to an ani, since it's in the usher's house and he's the owner, we follow the bailam of this house, and it's not a keli anymore if you threw it out of Shabbos.
So then what's the issue if it's not a keli anymore?
Anything that's not a keli is muktzah and gansen.
Like the stone.
It's like stones, money. We said yesterday that
wrapping,
anything that's not a keli, that doesn't have a use, is completely usher to be metaltal at all.
So the paper wrapping was something, or the box.
We're going to get to garbage a little bit more in this Perek. We'll see additional halachas relating to that. But if you threw it on Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe agrees with the Magen Mishnah, brings this halacha that if you threw it on Shabbos, then throwing it into the garbage on Shabbos doesn't change its status. Final din of halacha gimel klishin nisrei ea. If a keli became very loose and broken, you shouldn't grab and break off a piece to use, because that's maybe in this case it's okay. But what if you're going to start breaking other kelim? You don't have to break things on Shabbos, so don't touch this keli. Halacha dalet. We said that stones are not kalim, you're not to use them on Shabbos. What about bathroom? In those days, stones were typically often used to clean oneself in the bathroom. So there's a special heter for the bathroom that you're allowed to bring 3 stones that are smooth to clean oneself. A kama shiyuron kamayad. And how many? 3 that can fit inside your hand. Aval adama shikrevel esparech. But if you want to say, oh, I want to bring dirt, I want to bring earth to clean myself, since it crumbles, but it's not good for the bathroom. It's not there's no heter. You can even take the stones up to the roof if you want to. Someone wants to relieve himself on the roof. So even though we said the avanim are really muktzah, they're not even a keli. We're giving a special heter to use them in the bathroom. It doesn't mean that you're limited on where you can take them. You want to take them up to the roof? Take them up to the roof. It's not an extra tircha. We don't have a problem with that. What if it rained and they sunk in the mud? If you can still detect them, if they still are noticeable, you're allowed to take them out. We're not concerned about the hole that you're making by taking them out. If there's a stone that was already used, you can see that someone already used it, and a person wants to use the rest of it. Obviously different sanitary conditions than we're maybe familiar with today. If you see there's already waste on it, so then that this is sort of set aside for this purpose, and then it's mutter to carry them out of the socks. Halacha, hey, what if you have a choice between a stone and a cheres? A stone is muktzah, cheres is not muktzah. Still, mekaneach b'tzura, you should use the stone because that's safe, and a cheres is not safe; it can cut you. But if it was from the neck of a jug, where that's a very smooth part of the keli, and we don't have a concern that's going to hurt you, then mekanech b'cheres, so then that's preferable. If you have a choice between stone and grass, if the grass is soft, use them. They're preferable from lav. If they're not soft, mekanech b'tzrar, better to use the stone. Halacha vav. You have a mat that became so tattered, now you just have a piece of the mat. We actually treat this as a keli whose main purpose is for heter, but if you can use it to cover dirt. But the remnants of clothing, which aren't 3x3, you're not allowed to carry them. They're not good for anything at all, so it's not a keli, so it's completely muktzah. Now the Maggid Mishnah says, this is based on a Gemara. The Gemara says, Matlanias, they don't have shalosh and shalosh. Now, the Rif said that it's talking about regular clothing. However, Maggid Mishnah says, I saw b'shem Deravid that the Gemara is talking about a talis shel mitzvah. Dafka talis shel mitzvah, you're not going to use a small piece to clean up tinuf. If it's larger than 3x3, maybe you can use it for something else. If it's less than 3x3, you can use it for tinuf, but it's a talis shel mitzvah. You're not going to use leftover ripped up talis to cover that. So that's why it has a special din. That's why it's also to carry it. But the Rambam clearly doesn't hold like the Rabbi. The Rambam says that all shiar begadim also the talpin. Now today ben Shulchan Aruch, I'm going to go into the whole Hilchos, but he brings this whole thing by Hilchos, and he says, first he goes with the Rambam, then he says v'yesh oimrim that it's only the talis shel mitzvah, and he says the ikar is kasvara harishayna that less than 3x3 is not a keli. Unless you set it aside, unless you're miyached it. If you go ahead on your miyached, you can miyached anything. But we're talking about a stam, a piece of clothing, it's usher, like the Rambam says. Shivrei tanur, broken piece of an oven, mutal taltlon, you're allowed to carry it. It's like anything that's lahater. If you have a stove where one of the legs fell off, usher the taltla, or you're not allowed to carry it, shem yitka, because it might get stuck. And that would be a problem. Slum shel aliyah, asr l'taltlish, and of teres kli. You have a ladder that leads up to your attic. You're not allowed to carry it because it's not considered a keli. It's not meant to be moved around. Shel shevach, but the ladder you use to climb up to the bird cages, the birdhouses, mutaleh hataisai. You are allowed to tilt it. But you shouldn't carry it around from birdhouse to birdhouse. For a different reason, because there's very adjacent to tzads, the capturing creatures. So you're allowed to tilt it, but don't carry it around. The rod that's used to harvest the olives. So it really depends on what it looks like. If it looks like a keli, so then it's a kli, which is used for an isser, to harvest olives, which you obviously don't have to do on Shabbos. how do you decide whether it has a teres clear or not? So in Pirush HaMishnayos, the Rambam says that if it has some kind of extension at the end, which you can use while you're picking the olives, you can see if it gets grease, some oil on it, it tells you the quality of the olives. So then there's something of a kli kibul. So then there's something more substantial to the kana. Then it's a kli. Then it's a kli shemachtalis. Kana sheskin balabayas lias pesach an oil boy. If you have a rod that's used to open windows, and the yesh is kli, the same principle. If there's something to it that makes it look like more of a keli, not just a stick, then in that case it's a kli shemachtal heter, because opening windows, of course, is not prohibited. Halacha ches. A door that had a hinge. We know from yesterday that a door of a house is muktzah. So afal pi she'ein la'atot tzir, even though it doesn't have its hinge now, shechina listin b'mokah muktzah, and you were going to use it to carry it around and cover up some area of inigreres, shenaitlin oisa b'seismin ba, and you're carrying it around, you're picking it up, you're sealing things with it. B'chin chadakim, and the same goes for brambles. Pieces from the bush that you use to close things, a mat that drags on the floor. So all three things, the door, the brambles, and the mattress, the mat, if they're tied to the wall, so that makes it look more like they are sort of serving as a keli. But if they're just on the ground, you can't use them. And if they're not on the earth, if they're on top of something, also then you could use them. Halacha tes, delas shehiluach achar, a door, which is essentially not really a door, it's just basically a piece of wood. And you just sort of, whenever you want to close the door, you pick this piece of wood up and you stick it in the hole. If there's no base at the bottom, it looks a bit like a doorstep, which makes it look like a keli for closing, but it's not a keli, you can't use it. A bolt that has a bulb at the end that helps it stay in place, which proves that bulb at the end shows that it's specifically dedicated for locking. It's not just a beam like any other beam. Then you could use it. Halacha yud. But if you have a bowl that does not have the bulb at the end, if it's tied to the door, so we've seen before that being tied to the door also makes it look like it's a keli noilam, but you're allowed to use it and lock the door with it. Or if it's carried together with a rope attaching it to the door, it comes along with, even if the rope isn't tied to the door, but if the rope is tied to it, so it also shows that it's a keli, it's used for a purpose. But if the string is attached to the door, and the bolt itself comes off, and you put the bolt in the corner, and then when you want to lock, then you would tie it to the string, and then you lock it, then you're not allowed to use it on Shabbos. It doesn't look like a keli, it doesn't have a clustera, and it's not tied to the door, and it doesn't have a string attached to it. So none of the ways we said are in use here. So it's not good. You have a candelabrum that has several parts. No matter the size, you're not allowed to carry it. Because you might actually put it back together on Shabbos, which is his own subject, putting these kinds of things together. But clearly, we're saying you're not allowed to, and you're not even allowed to carry it. If it had grooves, it only looks like it has parts. It's not actually made up of parts, but there's the appearance. If it's very big, you have to carry it with two hands. So then it's also to carry it, but it looks too much like a menorah of cholias. But if it was smaller, you're allowed to carry it. Halacha yud beis. You have a shoe that's on top of the block the shoemaker uses to shape the shoe around it. You're allowed to take it off on Shabbos. It's not muktzah. You have a clothes press. So and it's a private press, not a professional. Matirin, so you're allowed to open it to take something out. Of a lay kaivshim, you're not allowed to press clothing on Shabbos. And if it's a professional one, from a cleaner's, lo yiga ba, you're not allowed to touch it. If It's professional equipment. We know from yesterday, professional equipment, you don't want anyone touching it or using it for anything else. And obviously it can't be used for its main purpose. And when it comes to pieces of wool, it's also, you're not allowed to carry them because you're makbid, also like a form of muktzah machbis chesaron kiss. However, if you specifically dedicate, we said this before, for all kinds of things, if you have a specific tashmish for certain things, it could be materit, and it's mutarim. Shlochin, hides, skins, mutar l'taltalon, you're allowed to carry them. Whether they're personal, private, or they belong to a professional, one doesn't care what they're used for. Halacha Yud Gimel. This is an important halacha regarding garbage and dirt on Shabbos, right? So garbage and dirt seemingly is useless, seemingly should be, it's not a keli, should be muktzah. You should not be able to handle garbage at all and remove garbage at all in any situation. However, there's a special din that allows us, under certain conditions, to remove garbage. Rambam says, Kol davar metunaf, anything that's dirty, anything that's filth, if it's in the yard where you're actually sitting, they can be removed to the garbage or to an outhouse. And that's halachically the term in this part of Hilchos Shabbos. We refer to the graf shel as something you're allowed to carry and remove. But if they're in a nearby yard and they're bothering you, you are allowed to cover it, so therefore that way a child won't get dirty, but you're not allowed to carry it. It's not a keli, it's muktzah. If you have spit on the earth, so what you can do with that is you're allowed to step on it casually as you're walking and continue walking. And earlier when we were learning about Mimareach, we mentioned that the Magen Avraham says that it's not a problem of memachik and Mimareach because you just want it to get absorbed, you don't want it to be smeared around, and that could be a heter for many other things, as we mentioned at the time. You have a warming pan with the ash inside, even though there's broken wood, pieces of wood on it. You want to get rid of the ashes, so the ashes is dafka heter to carry it away. You're not allowed to take garbage and put it in a new keli. You have an empty can that's right now mutter, it's not muktzah. You're not allowed to put garbage in the can and turn the can now into a graf shel re'i. If it happened on its own, or you went ahead and you did it anyway, even though you weren't supposed to, you are allowed to remove it. If you're looking at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, so first of all, Sifai and Beis, the Rebbe more or less says what the Rambam said here with some more elaboration, but there's some additional things that the Rebbe adds there. Halacha and Gimel. Alter points out that even though you're allowed to remove them from the house, you can't bring them back. Let's say you had a chamber pot, a potty, and you took it out, and you say, hey, actually, no, I want to put more garbage inside. I want to bring it back. You're not allowed to bring it back inside your house because they're also to carry even when they're empty. You can't use it. You wouldn't use it for anything. You wouldn't even use it to cover another keli. And muktzah machmas miyas is only mutter if it's useful for something, and this is not useful for anything. So what if you really need to bring that garbage can back or whatever it is, the chamber pot, you really need to add more garbage to it. So what can you do? So the Rebbe says you can put water inside, because water you're allowed to carry. It's still, even the water that you poured in here, you can still give it to an animal. Now usually we don't say that you can carry something that's usher by putting something that's mutter along with it. But here, because it's helping you clean out the garbage, they were makel. Just like we have the kula of taking the garbage out, we have the kula you can put the water in to bring it back to take more garbage out. The Alter Rebbe adds that there's different opinions, but that we'll leave it at that. Halacha Sif Ayin Daled, the Alter Rebbe says when we say there's a problem to bring the garbage back into the house, that's only if you put it down. But if you took it out and then you changed your mind while you're still holding it, be ready to learn when it comes to muktzah, that as long as it's still in your hand, you're allowed to keep walking with it and put it where you need to put it. Halacha Ayin Hey, the Alter Rebbe says that to make a graf shel re'i lechatchila, like the Rambam says, to make it disgusting, because really ideally something that's betunaf shouldn't be carried on Shabbos. You're sort of creating a thing where it's going to be usher, but still mutter because you're allowed to. You shouldn't do that. But if you did it anyways, like the Rambam said, you are allowed to carry it. And halacha Ayin Vav, the Alter Rebbe says an interesting thing that if there's an issue of hefsid, you're allowed to create a situation where you're sitting next to a graf shari. Let's say the graf shari is in a place where you're not makar. We said earlier that if it's in your chutzner, you're allowed to carry it away. If it's in a different chutzner, you're not allowed to carry it away. So the Alter Rebbe says if it's in a situation where you stand to gain, you're allowed to move yourself to the next chutzner, and then you can say, oh, now it's bothering me, and now I can carry it away. So what's the example? You have something that's going to get ruined in the chutzner. So you're allowed to move your bed there and lie down, or bring your table to eat there, or your books to learn, and that becomes a kvias. And then you say, oh, it's so disgusting, and then you take the garbage away. You didn't want the garbage to remain out in the rain and get even worse, so you park yourself near the garbage, and then you say, oh, it's disgusting, the garbage is disgusting, and then you carry the garbage away to some other place. But you have to dafka bring some furniture. If you just sit there, though, the Alter Rebbe says it's not enough, because if you're just sitting there and you say, oh, it's disgusting, we tell you, so go away. Why are you sitting next to it? But if you bring your furniture there, then we say, okay, you're already parked here. We're not going to tell you to move. You can move the garbage. Halacha Yadalet. Shemen sheyetz mitachas hakodesh habeis habad b'Shabbos. If you have oil that's sort of coming out on its own from under the press on Shabbos, or if you have dates or almonds that were ready to be sold, you're allowed to eat this on Shabbos. Or if you have storage of grain piled up, you're allowed to start eating from it on Shabbos. There's no such thing as food that's muktzah on Shabbos. All food is ready. Unless you have figs or dried figs or dried grapes, raisins, while they're in the process of drying, because during the process they're not really very pleasant, they're not edible. So at that point, they're muktzah. If a barrel was uncovered or a melon broke open, it's not edible. You're allowed to pick them up and move them to a better area, a private area, because you don't want people to eat from it. Similarly, a kameya which has not been proven, tried and tested. Even though we said earlier when it comes to tiltul versus sarab, you're allowed to wear the kameya she'enei mumcha, and I say you're allowed to carry it inside around your house. It's not muktzah. Leftover oil in a lamp or in a bowl where you lit on Shabbos, also stabak when it's Shabbos. You can't use that oil for anything else. As we learned, it's an isra was done with it, so it remains off limits the whole Shabbos. You have storage of grain or of jugs of wine, even though you're allowed to eat from it. Also, you're not allowed to just start clearing it all out on Shabbos. That's going too far. Unless it's for a mitzvah. You want to make room for guests, or you want to make room for learning. And how do you clear it out? Everyone fills up 4 or 5 boxes until you finish. You shouldn't sweep the bottom of the storage house of grain, as we learned earlier. In Perek, you can go in and make a path with your feet in and out, and that's it. Anything that's edible for the common animal, common pets or domesticated animals, creatures, you're allowed to carry it on Shabbos, but not if it's just for some exotic creature. Ketzad metalton is a turmis hayavesh. We said in the past, turmis is a lupin, kind of legume. So if it's dry, you can carry it, because the goat's eat it, if it's wet, because that's not edible. As a chatzav, a certain plant, the deer eat it, the sachardal, mustard, the plant before it was processed, the birds eat it, the doves, some as the bones, the dogs eat the bones. All kinds of shells and pits that are edible for animals, but then you're allowed to carry it. But if you're eating and you have things you're eating, the leftovers, that's not edible for a pet, for an animal, you eat the edible part, and you toss the inedible parts behind you, but also the taltlan, you're not allowed to carry it at all. If you look at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, there's a very interesting chumrah Now the Rebbe says that when it comes to these klippen and gardinen that are not edible for an animal, you eat it. The Rebbe says you have to spit it out with your tongue. You can't even use your hands in the process of spitting if you're eating seeds or whatever it is, and this is the stuff you spit out. You're not even allowed to use your hand. You have to spit it out with your tongue. And Alter Rebbe says, and don't spit it in front of you and then say, when there's going to be a lot, then it's going to become a graf shel re'i, because you're not supposed to make a graf shel re'i lechatchila. Now, first of all, Achrayim say most people are not machmer when it comes to these things. There were some gedolim who were machmer, but especially if you get stuck in your mouth, you can use your hand. And also, what we do is, it is on the table. There's going to be crumbs at the end of the meal. You can treat the crumbs like a graf shel re'i, and so you can treat whatever else you spit out as a graf shel re'i. You don't have to spit it on the floor, because we don't typically put those types of things on the floor. So, but it's interesting. It's not so pashut, this whole the klippas from your mouth and how to clean them away on Shabbos. Continuing along to zayin metaltlin basar tefuach. If you have meat that's swelled, it's clearly not such good meat. You can carry it because an animal can eat it. Metaltlin basar chay. You can carry raw meat, bein tafel bein maliach, whether it's completely plain or whether it's salted. Because it is edible for a human. Dog maliach, a salted fish. Avla tafel, but a plain unsalted fish. Also, the taltlate not edible for anyone or any normal animal that we have around the house. You're not allowed to carry pieces of glass. This is very interesting. According to Chazal, ostriches eat glass. I believe I've seen it discussed by those who are into looking up the details of science and things the Chazal mentioned about where this idea came from, that ostriches eat glass. Apparently, ostriches do eat a lot of stuff. They're not so picky. They don't, though as far as we know, they don't go around specifically eating glass. At any rate, it doesn't matter to us because we don't have ostriches in our house, so it shouldn't affect how we look at glass. Packages of branches, even though elephants eat them, because we don't have elephants. Type of onion, even though the ravens eat it. We don't have pet ravens around. Most people don't have them. Maggid Mishnah mentioned something interesting, that in the Mishnah, B'Shim Gamliel was matir the luf for the ravens, and in the Gemara, he was matir the glass for the ostriches. The question is, why? And the explanation is that B'Shim Gamliel holds, Kol Yisro B'nei Malachim, all Jews are princes, are kings, and princes and kings do tend to have exotic creatures around. So, due to our very high status, we're also considered to be worthy of having these types of birds around, but the halacha is not like him, at least in this application. And the elephant, everyone agrees. Even Rishon ben Gamliel agreed to the elephant. Bundles of straw and wood and branches and skin. If you set them aside for an animal to eat metaltanis, you can carry them. And if not, you can't carry them. Different types of grasses and plants. If you were going to use them for wood, so then you can't use it on Shabbos because it was set aside for wood. But if it was set aside for eating, then you could use it. Different plants. Amita is mint, actually. The meat, same halacha goes for all of them. Depends what you were going to use them for. Halacha, you test. You're not allowed to clean away the dirty food from in front of the cow that's eating. Whether it's eating out of a kli, whether it's eating off the ground, and you're not allowed to push it to the side due to the dirt, because we're concerned that you might be smoothing out the earth while you're doing that. You can take what the donkey was eating, give it to the cow, but you can't take what the cow was eating and put it in front of the donkey. When the ox eats, it makes the food pretty disgusting with its saliva, and it's no longer worthy for any other animal to eat. And any leaves which have a bad smell and an animal wouldn't eat them, also you can carry them. The string which you use to string fish with, and animals find it disgusting, also not to carry, but if it's for meat, mutter. And now the last four halachas relate to handling a dead body on Shabbos. Halacha chaf. Even though you're not to carry that body on Shabbos, you're allowed to pour oil on it or wash it to keep it in a respectable condition. As long as you're not moving the limbs. So and you're allowed to pull out the pillow from under the body because so it could be on the sand where it can wait. You can bring cold vessels, metal, and put it on the stomach, so that way it keeps the stomach from swelling. And you can put things in the cavities in the body so that air doesn't go in. One can tie the jaw. Not to close the jaw, but to prevent the jaw from opening more. You're not to close the eyes because that's like moving a limb. If the dead body is lying in the sun, you can put a loaf or a child on it, and that's your heter to carry it. This is a special, unique heter for a mace that's in the sun. Otherwise, we can't just put a davar shel heter on top of an isser and carry it away. As I mentioned, with the water and the garbage, that's also an exception. Or if there's a fire where there's a dead body, so then in order to save it from the fire, you can use this special heter. And what if there's no thing you can put on top? You're allowed to snatch it away from the fire. Shema Yave Lachabes was concerned that if we don't let you, you might end up putting the whole fire out. Because a person really wouldn't want that dead body of a loved one to be burned. So either we'll let you carry it away, or else you might just put the fire out. But this, as we said, this special heter is only for a body. Because a person, he needs to take care of this body. He can't let it just sit there. It was in the sun, and there's nowhere to carry it, or they didn't want to move it away. So two people can come and sit on either side. They say, "Oh, I'm sitting here, now I'm hot. I don't feel comfortable." So each one brings a bed. Then they complain, "Oh, I'm sitting out here in the heat." So this one brings a mat and puts it on top of his head, and this one brings a mat. Then each one takes his bed away and goes and says, I'm ready to leave now. And now all of a sudden the mechitza sort of ends up there on its own. So it's a trick. So the mat sort of land like this, so the tops are touching each other. So that's how you're able to create a bit of an oil over the mace. If there's a dead body in the house and it's going bad, it's being embarrassed and they're being embarrassed. You're actually allowed to take it out of the house and put it in a carmelist. The dignity of a human being is so great that it can actually override a leisas shnemar shehu leisaser min hadavar asher yagidu lecha. So this is a derabanan. That's the leisasa here, right? I mean, we're just trying to bring out the chiddush. The fact that covered abrius overrides the derabanan is no big deal, but here it's also leisaser, and it even overrides that. And if they have somewhere to go, and then they can't take him out, they leave the body where it is, and they exit.
I don't know how.